Hi, this is Gideon Strauss again, and this is Vocational Wayfinding, winter of 2017. In this little video, I want to talk a little bit about the meaning of work. But before I talk about the meaning of work as such, or at least suggest to you a bit of a framework in terms of which to think about the meaning of work, let's talk about frameworks and reframing. The first book that you are required to read for this 6-week first module of Vocational Wayfinding is Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And very early in the book, in the introduction, they write this: design thinking involves certain simple mindsets. This book will teach you those mindsets and how to use them to do life design. The 5 mindsets you are going to learn in order to design your life are curiosity, bias to action, reframing, awareness, and radical collaboration. Now, you're going to have to read this introduction to get a bit of a sense of what they mean here and what they're saying. But it's the reframing mindset that I want to draw your attention to. And so just on the next page of the introduction, Evans and Burnett say this about reframing. They say one of the mindsets that you need for design thinking is the mindset of approaching problems so that you reframe problems. And they write, reframing is how designers get unstuck. Reframing also makes sure that we are working on the right problem. Life design involves key reframes that allow you to step back, examine your biases, and open up to new solution spaces. Throughout this book, they say we will be reframing dysfunctional beliefs that prevent people from finding the careers and the lives they want. Reframing is essential to finding the right problems and the right solutions. So the frameworks in terms of which we make sense of the world, in terms of which we understand the problems that face us, are incredibly important for us to be able to make progress on these challenges and these problems. If we have frameworks that rely on dysfunctional beliefs, then we are going to run up against walls. We're not going to find our way through the complexities of life in any helpful kind of a way. And so we have to examine the beliefs that we have with regard to the world, the ways in which we understand the world, for example, the ways in which we understand the meaning of work. We're going to have to examine these presuppositions that we hold, these biases that shape our actions. And we have to ask ourselves, are these functional or dysfunctional? Are they true to the way things are, or are they not true to the way things are? Are they adequately or approximately true in a way that will actually help us to come to grips with the challenges that we face in life? Or are they so out of whack with reality that they're actually impeding us, preventing us from making progress towards the things that we're trying to make progress toward. So in terms of thinking about the frameworks that we use to make sense of the meaning of work, this is going to be particularly helpful to you during the work that we are going to be doing in week 3 of this module. The assignment in that week is to articulate a kind of a compass for life, a mechanism by means of which you can navigate through life and determine whether you are making progress towards an integrity, a coherence of the whole of your life, where the path that you are taking in terms of making progress with regard to your career or other aspects of your vocation is aligned with the things that you care about most deeply, that you believe most strongly. And so Burnett and Evans ask you to design this compass in terms very simply of writing down 500 words, to write down your work view, your understanding of the meaning of work in 250 words, and your life view, your understanding of the purpose of a human life in 250 words. and then to consider the relative coherence or incoherence between your work view and your life view, to maybe re-articulate it in a way that brings greater coherence, and then throughout the whole process of vocational wayfinding to reference back to this worldview and life view, and in that way to have some measure to determine whether or not your life is becoming more coherent, more incoherent, whether your belief systems are functional in relation to reality or dysfunctional in relation to reality. So the meaning or the purpose of work, how do we think about that? In my conversations with Dave Evans, when they do this exercise with students in the design school in Stanford, they very frequently find that one of the problems that students have is that they think of their work primarily as having a purpose towards certain ends, and then they discover that the way they understand the meaning of their lives is incoherent with that understanding of the meaning and the purpose of work. So, for example, people can sometimes believe that the meaning of work for them simply is they work so as to become affluent. They work to get rich. Work is, you do whatever you need to be able to acquire as much money or as much wealth as you can, and that wealth, that money is going to buy you happiness. However you then define happiness in terms of the meaning of your life. People then discover that if you maximize the work that you do so as to maximize your earnings, you may well undermine the happiness that you find, for example, in family life or in other things that people identify as the actual meaning of their lives. People have all kinds of reasons why they do the work that they do. In addition to the pursuit of wealth, people do it for the pursuit of fame. People do it because they want resources to fund their play and their entertainment and their leisure. People sometimes work because they want to be able to tithe, to give a significant portion of their income towards the good things that they find meaning in. So to give to their faith communities, churches, synagogues, mosques, or to give to non-profits, maybe to create a foundation out of which to fund those causes that they deeply believe in. So these are all kinds of ways to think about the meaning and the purpose of work, but I want to suggest to you somewhat sturdier set of options in terms of making sense of the meaning of work. And I'm going to point towards, once again, a book that is not required reading for this course, but that offers us a bit of a framework, a typology, if you will, of understandings of the meaning of work. And that is this book, Working, Its Meaning and Limits, edited by Gilbert Meilaender. It's a compendium of 75 readings, poetry, scriptures, philosophy, excerpts from novels, all kinds of readings that explore the meaning of work. But what I find particularly helpful is that in the introduction to this book and in the structure of the book, Meilaender offers a typology of 4 different understandings of work, 4 different ways in which through the ages, specifically in the context of Western civilization, which is admittedly a limitation to this typology, but 4 ways in which people have made sense of the meaning of work. So let me list these 4 ways and show you the typology with which Meilaender works, and then we'll dive into each of them very briefly. So the 4 understandings of work that Meilaender identifies are as follows. Work as co-creation, work as co-creation, work as necessary for leisure, work as dignified but irksome, and work as vocation. Let me list those again. Work as co-creation, work as necessary for leisure, work as dignified but irksome, and work as vocation. So what Meilaender says is that if you were to look at the ways in which people make sense of work, the understandings of the meaning of work that we find throughout, in particular, the history of Western civilization, from the tragedies of the Greeks through the early Greek philosophers, Roman philosophy, Christian beliefs, Jewish beliefs, through to the era of the Enlightenment up until our time, you can find these four understandings emerge as competitors, sometimes with great clarity, sometimes somewhat more diffusely, but these are four ways of thinking about the meaning of work. And I hope that as you try and clarify for the compass exercise your own understanding of the meaning of work, your work view, that you will sort of reference this typology and either articulate for yourself the way in which you resonate most with one of these types of understandings of work, or ways in which you want to fuse two or more of these understandings of the meaning of work, or perhaps an own understanding of work that goes outside or beyond these four potential options, wherever you might derive that from. So let's dive into the four types of understandings of work. Work is co-creation. So this view of work is a view of work that considers work itself to be the meaning of life. Work is the meaning of life. Now, this is, to me, a very attractive understanding of work, because don't we yearn for our work to be meaningful, to be significant, to be about things that really matter to itself, intrinsically really matter. So work as co-creation is a way of getting at an understanding of work that sees work in itself to be intrinsically meaningful. It originates from a portrayal of work that we find, for example, all the way back in the poetry of Genesis 1 and 2. And this is also where Meilaender gets his own sort of title for this kind of understanding of work, work as co-creation. The notion is this: the poetry of Genesis 1 portrays God as a creator. God creates all of created reality, creates the cosmos, and then within the context of that created reality, God creates humanity, and humanity is created in the image of God. So in a sense, how humans are in the world shows one another and the world what God is like. We bear the image, we communicate the image of what God is like into the world as human beings. And so if God is a creator, if God is a worker, then humans as the image bearers of God are creators or co-creators with the divine. We are workers. To be human is to be a worker. You find this understanding of work, which can be derived from Genesis 1 and 2. It's not necessarily the only reading of Genesis 1 and 2 for an understanding of work, but you can see this kind of understanding of the meaning of work in, for example, a Catholic encyclical like Laborans Exercem by John Paul II. You can find it in the beautiful essay by Dorothy Sayers, Why Work? I'll try and provide a link to that essay in our Google Classroom. But it's not only Christians who see work as intrinsically meaningful and work really as the defining characteristic of humanity, the meaning of a human life. You can also find that in many of the writings, especially the earlier writings of someone like Karl Marx, for whom work really was how human beings expressed our humanity. Now, there's a downside to a view that says that work is the meaning of life, and that is that it raises the question, so what is the meaning of the lives of people who have no work or who have bad work? If you are a disabled person whose specific set of disabilities means that you cannot do work as broadly or mostly defined, or you are someone who, because of life circumstances, historical circumstances, your location on the planet, a variety of factors, are not able to do work that you are able to experience as meaningful, then does that mean that your life is meaningless? Now, someone like Karl Marx obviously had a solution to that. He would have said that almost everybody's work is meaningless under current societal circumstances, and that we need a comprehensive revolution of society. We need a comprehensive turning over of things to generate a future in which all people might in fact enjoy meaningful work. But there you go. That's the first perspective on work that Meilaender identifies. And let me just give you a glimpse of what that sounds like by reading just 2 paragraphs from Dorothy Sayers' essay, Why Work? Sayers writes, "The church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. Let the church remember this, that every maker and worker is called to serve God in his profession or trade, not outside it. The apostles complained rightly when they said it was not meet they should leave the word of God and serve tables. Their vocation was to preach the word. But the person whose vocation it is to prepare the meals beautifully might with equal justice protest, it is not meet for us to leave the service of our tables to preach the word. The official church wastes time and energy, and moreover commits sacrilege in demanding that secular workers should neglect their proper vocation in order to do Christian work, by which the church means ecclesiastical work. The only Christian work is good work, well done. Let the church see to it that the workers are Christian people and do their work well as to God. Then all the work will be Christian work, whether it is church embroidery or sewage farming," and then she continues. So this is the first possible understanding of the meaning of work, that work is in itself meaningful, that it is in fact a way at the very heart of expressing our humanity, and that it is a co-creative work with God, if you understand this in a Christian perspective. Second perspective is that of work as necessary for leisure. And this is a perspective which we find in some of the greatest classical or ancient philosophers of the Greek era in their work. We find it sometimes embedded in a medieval understanding of the meaningfulness of work and the preeminence of the work of prayer as expressed in the monastic life. In recent years, it's an understanding of work that has been revived, revitalized, and promulgated by the philosopher Joseph Pieper, P-I-E-P-E-R, Joseph Pieper. And I'll read a small passage from Pieper. But it's a view of work that rejects the tyranny of the first view, which argues that work in itself is the meaning of our lives, and instead says no, the meaning of our lives has to do with the pursuit of meaning, and that pursuit of meaning requires leisure. It requires enough time and enough resources to be able to really reflect on what life is all about. Whether we do that as philosophers, whether we do that prayerfully, whether we do that by reading poetry and novels, watching movies, but that really the meaning of the human life is not work, but the pursuit of meaning, and that the purpose of work is to create the means and the affluence necessary to be able to enjoy the leisure that will allow for the contemplation of meaning. So this is an understanding of the meaning of work that privileges the contemplative life, the reflective life, over the active life, the working life. And it has a potential downside. To my mind, this sounds like a very powerful understanding of reality, which creates a dichotomy between the sacred and the secular, or a dichotomy between the work of reason and the functioning of the body, a kind of a dichotomy that reaches towards a higher realm, whether that is the realm of rational contemplation, like the classical philosophers would have argued, the realm of the ideas, or whether that is the realm of the spiritual, which we attain by means of prayer and the leisure to be able to be prayerfully engaged, and a lower realm as the realm of mere work, of the functionality of the body, a secular realm as opposed from a sacred realm. To give you, however, a sense of the power and the attractiveness of this view of work as necessary for leisure, let me read you just a couple of paragraphs from Joseph Pieper. So, Pieper in the preceding paragraphs have made an argument against three aspects of work very critically. He is against an idolatry of activity, he is against an overvaluation of drudgery, and he is against an overvaluation of social usefulness. And so here he writes, the idea of leisure is diametrically opposed to the totalitarian concept of the worker. And this under each of the three aspects of work we have considered. With regard to the idolizing of activity, leisure is essentially non-activity. It is a form of silence. Leisure amounts to that precise way of being silent, which is a prerequisite for listening in order to hear. For only the listener is able to hear. Leisure implies an attitude of total receptivity toward and willing immersion in reality, an openness of the soul through which alone may come about those great and blessed insights that no amount of mental labor can ever achieve. Against the overvaluation of drudgery, leisure means an attitude of celebration, and celebration is the opposite of exertion. Those who are basically suspicious of achievement without effort are by the same token as unable to enjoy leisure as they are usable to celebrate a feast. As they are unable to celebrate a feast. There's an actual typo in the text. To truly celebrate, however, something else is required. More on this shortly. Against the overvaluation of social usefulness, leisure implies that a person is freed for this period of time from any social function. Yet leisure does not mean the same as a break. A break, whether for an hour or 3 weeks, is designed to provide a respite from work in anticipation of more work. It finds its justification in relation to work. Leisure is something entirely different. The essence of leisure is not to assure that we may function smoothly, but rather to assure that we, embedded in our social function, are enabled to remain fully human. That we may not lose the ability to look beyond the limits of our social and functional station, to contemplate and celebrate the world as such, to become and be that person who is essentially oriented toward the whole of reality, and that all this be achieved through our own free disposition, which contains its own significance and is not geared toward anything. So that's Pieper on work as necessary for leisure. A third understanding of work that Meilaender identifies is work as dignified but irksome. Again, this is an appealing understanding of the meaning of work because it faces up to the gritty reality that many people have to do really dirty work, physically dirty work, or in other ways toilsome and scuffed and difficult and unpleasant and perhaps not intrinsically meaningful work. Perhaps the vast majority of people on the planet find themselves in jobs that, if they could do what they love, they would not be doing. But this understanding of work says that even if work is almost always irksome in the world as it is, it can nonetheless be dignified. This is a very different understanding of the meaning of work, both from an understanding of work as co-creation and as an understanding of work as necessary for leisure. It denies the necessarily intrinsic meaning of work, of the approach to work as co-creation, and it denies the utility of work primarily as allowing for the contemplation of meaning, as in the work approach to work as necessary for leisure, by saying that we just have to work to be able to put food on the table for ourselves and for those for whom we care, and that there is a real dignity in that. We have to do work because our societies require certain things to be accomplished, and there's a dignity in that, even if the work itself is irksome. This is a view of work that, when it is held by Christians, has a very thoroughgoing respect for the reality of the fallenness of God's good creation. It is found, for example, in the theological work of someone like Jacques Ellul, but it is also with poignancy and beauty found in the journalism of George Orwell. Now, there is a downside to this perception of work, in that it creates a barrier for our understanding of the possibility of work being meaningful as such. It can sometimes be exercised with some cynicism, and it can be either very inspiring or less inspiring, depending on how it operates in someone's understanding of the meaning of work. Let me read just another long paragraph, this one from George Orwell, from his book The Road to Wigan Pier, which, as I said, is a poignant and beautiful exploration of the lives of coal miners in England in the earlier 20th century. Orwell writes, "Watching coal miners at work, you realize momentarily what different universes different people inhabit. Down there, where coal is dug, it is a sort of world apart which one can quite easily go through life without ever hearing about. Probably a majority of people would even prefer not to hear about it. Yet it is the absolutely necessary counterpart of our world above. Practically everything we do, from eating an ice to crossing the Atlantic, and from baking a loaf to writing a novel, involves the use of coal, directly or indirectly. For all the arts of peace, coal is needed. If war breaks out, it is needed all the more. In time of revolution, the miner must go on working, or the revolution must stop. For revolution, as much as reaction, needs coal. Whatever may be happening on the surface, the hacking and shoveling have got to continue without a pause, or at any rate without pausing for more than a few weeks at the most. In order that Hitler may march the goose step, that the Pope may denounce Bolshevism, that the cricket crowds may assemble at Lord's, that the poets may scratch one another's backs, coal has got to be forthcoming. But on the whole, we are not aware of it. We all know that we must have coal, but we seldom or never remember what coal getting involves. Here am I, sitting writing in front of my comfortable coal fire. It is April, but I still need a fire. Once a fortnight the coal cart drives up to the door, and men in leather jerkins carry the coal indoors in stout sacks, smelling of tar, and shoot it clanking into the coal hole under the stairs. It is only very rarely, when I make a definite mental effort, that I connect this coal with that far-off labour in the mines. It is just coal, something that I have got to have, black stuff that arrives mysteriously from nowhere in particular, like manna, except that you have to pay for it. You could quite easily drive a car right across the north of England and never once remember that hundreds of feet below the road you are on the miners, or that hundreds of feet below the road you are on, the miners are hacking at the coal. Yet in a sense it is the miners who are driving your car forward. Their lamplit world down there is as necessary to the daylight world above as the root is to the flower." So that's Orwell. The last of the four understandings of work that Meilaender identifies is work as vocation. Here, the meaning of work is relational. Work is a means towards the nurturing of a specific set of vocations. From a Christian perspective, this would include our relation to God. Work is a vocation in this understanding of work because it is God who draws us towards certain work. God calls us, we have a calling, a vocation towards certain work. But that calling is not something that is simply intrinsic in the work itself. It is relational. It is something that happens between us and work, so that our work is an answer to the call of God. Our work, in fact, constitutes a dialogue with the divine. But this understanding of work as vocation also talks about a connection towards those aspects of reality, those parts of creation that call towards us, towards which we resonate in relationship and which we come to do. In my own case, for example, a call to the world of ideas and the craft of writing means that a significant part of my work is that of journalism, and it's part of the world that calls to me and with which I establish a relationship through my work. It is also a means for establishing relationships with other persons. We do our work usually in the service of others, and in that way serve God by means of the service of others. Through our work, we are called to serve others. And it's a way in which to stand in relationship to ourselves. We find in the accomplishment of our work, the formation of our own character. We become certain kinds of persons. Our identity is willy-nilly interwoven with our work, whether it's good or bad work, whether we have much work or little work. And it is a profound challenge for our sense of identity when we have no work discernibly to be found. This is an understanding of work that we find, for example, resurgent in the era of the Reformation. We can find it in the work of Martin Luther, John Calvin, subsequent Puritans, Perkins, and others. But we can also find it in the work of a contemporary poet like David Whyte, whom we will read in the second module to this course. There's a downside again to this. Weber identified some of the downside, others identified that downside, and that is a kind of a salvation anxiety where people work furiously because it is in the answering to their vocation that they feel they justify their salvation by God. And people find their worth and their meaning so deeply entrenched in their work that there's a tremendous anxiety that if our work is not meaningful enough, or if we're not making enough of a difference in the world through our work, that our lives become meaningless, and perhaps even that we are not signifying our own state of salvation in a Christian understanding of that. Also could come with the legalism, where people will work endless hours because this is kingdom work, is being done in response to the King of the universe and in response to that call, and we might neglect other aspects of our lives rather than our work. Is not unheard of for Calvinists, and I count myself as a Calvinist, to become workaholics, partly because of this dynamic. Let's, to conclude, read a short passage of John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion that articulates something of this view of work as vocation. Calvin writes, "It is enough if we know that the Lord's calling is in everything the beginning and foundation of well-being. And if there is anyone who will not direct himself to it, he will never hold to the straight path in his duties. Perhaps sometimes he could contrive something laudable in appearance, but whatever it may be in the eyes of men, it will be rejected before God's throne. Besides, there will be no harmony among the several parts of his life. Accordingly, your life will then be best ordered when it is directed to this to this goal. For no one, impelled by his own rashness, will attempt more than his calling will permit, because he will know that it is not lawful to exceed its bounds. A man of obscure station will lead a private life ungrudgingly so as not to leave the rank in which he has been placed by God. Again, it will be no slight relief from cares, labors, troubles, and other burdens for a man to know that God is his guide in all these things. The magistrate will discharge his functions more willingly. The head of the household will confine himself to his duty. Each man will bear and swallow the discomforts, vexations, weariness, and anxieties in his way of life when he has been persuaded that the burden was laid upon him by God. From this will arise also a singular consolation, that no task will be so sordid and base, provided you obey your calling in it, that it will not shine and be reckoned very precious in God's sight. So there we have it, 4 understandings of the meaning of work, a bit of a typology or a framework in terms of which you can reflect on your understanding of the meaning of work. Work as the meaning of life, work as co-creation, work as necessary for leisure and enabling contemplation on the meaning of reality, work as dignified but irksome, and work as vocation or calling in response to the divine or some aspect of reality. I hope you find this indeed to be grist for your mill as you work on crafting your own compass in the exercise that has to be done for this course.